Whether a prop was reused from another science fiction franchise or repurposed from something else entirely, there are plenty of Star Wars props that have interesting stories behind their creation. I'm Ewan, you're watching What Culture Star Wars, and here are 10 origins of Star Wars props you won't believe. Number 10. A collection of random items were thrown into the franchise. When you stop to think about it for a moment, who really knows what kind of equipment people used a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away? Take C-3PO's communicator from A New Hope. That thing was nothing more than a plumbing valve thrown together at a moment's notice. In that same film, Luke's home on Tatooine was filled with blue milk and other sci-fi contraptions, but look a little bit closer and you'll see something familiar. Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen's shelves were filled with all kinds of Tupperware, just average, ordinary Tupperware. Then there's Willrow Hood. Oh, our favourite beloved Willrow Hood. A random background character from Empire Strikes Back who is seen escaping from Cloud City when the Empire takes over. He's holding a strange white device which turns out to be nothing more than a standard ice cream maker, and it's also included with his officially licensed action figure. Many of these objects and more were modified only slightly to make them appear used and more sci-fi-y, but for the most part, what you saw was what you got at a local hardware store. Number 9. Most of the drink dispensers at the Mos Eisley Cantina came from Rolls-Royce engines. The drink dispensers at the Mos Eisley Cantina are actually pretty fascinating once you learn what went into making them. Most of the piping and metal tubes you see are nothing more than painted and chrome-plated PVC pipes of various sizes, but the larger cylinders came straight out of an old Rolls-Royce jet engine. Legendary Academy Award-winning set director Roger Christian, the man who gave Star Wars its signature look, explained that most of the bar items were cobbled together from a scrapyard because there wasn't enough time to fabricate items in the normal process. Most of the parts were stripped of anything sticking in or out of them, and what was left was chrome-plated. The specific components that went into those hanging drink dispensers were part of the combustion assembly from a Rolls-Royce Derwent jet engine. Interestingly, those parts would be reused to create an iconic character who first appeared in The Empire Strikes Back. Number 8. IG-88 began life as part of the distillery at the Mos Eisley Cantina. Star Wars was a massive success, so when it came time to make the sequel, there was a lot more money available to be spent. That didn't stop the prop and set designers from scrapping old items to create something new though. After all, why spend money on something new when you can just reuse something on hand and make it still look really good? There's a particularly noteworthy scene in Empire that introduces the world to the galaxy's most notorious bounty hunters. These include Boba Fett, Bossk, Forlom, Dengar, Zuckuss, Zuckuss is a great name, and of course IG-88. The deadly droid is a fan favourite thanks to his sleek and frightening visage, which is somewhat familiar. That's because it started as a drink dispenser at the Mos Eisley Cantina. Well, before that it was part of a Rolls-Royce jet engine, but in Star Wars canon, it was a drink dispenser. There weren't a ton of modifications made to it either, save for the red eyes and facial protrusions. Number 7. Luke's first lightsaber began its life as a camera flash. Okay, so it's 1977 and George Lucas has dreamed up a new type of weapon, a laser sword with a hilt being the only physical part. This presented some design challenges, seeing as how a lightsaber needed to look intriguing, but it also needed to avoid looking too much like a flashlight. After all, what kid hasn't picked up a flashlight pretending it was a lightsaber? To avoid that, legendary SFX artist John Steers looked to the Graflex 3, a camera from the 1940s. The camera's flash was installed via a separate flash tube connected to the camera through a wire and featured a large reflective dish. Steers got rid of the dish and the flash bulbs, leaving a sleek metal tube. From there, he glued some hard plastic T-tracks from a display cabinet he had on hand for the base. Those aren't wiper blades, contrary to belief. He also got really fun and creative by adding a collection of switches that he plucked off just some ordinary calculator. By the time of Empire Strikes Back, Steers swapped out the calculator buttons for some bits of circuit board. The lightsaber was literally pieced together from items he had on hand, which is amazing, seeing as how important that prop is to film history. Number 6. R2's head started out as the top of a film studio lamp. When the prototype of R2 was being put together, his head was nothing more than a metal studio lamp. At the time, his body was carved out of marine plywood Roger Christian brought from home, and that was only the beginning. As his design evolved, so too did the components that went into him. His little mechanical arm that used to press buttons and manipulate objects was actually a pickle and ice cube grabber, an appliance that I refuse to believe exists. Various other parts that went into these small details include a part from a hydraulic reference turntable. The restraining bolt the JAWAS put on him was actually a lens housing for an Araflex standard camera lens mount. The protruding lens that sits beside his large red light just below the main eye lens is a Vickers Viscount 700 series turboprop airliner reading light. If you've ever sat on a plane with an adjustable light, you're old, but you've also fiddled with one of R2's eyes. Number 5. The Millennium Falcon set consisted of airplane scraps and devices to heat food? Most of what you see in the Falcon cockpit came from pieces of jet engines, and Roger Christian had to train prop men to break them down, scrap them, and line them along the walls into different categories. This required a ton of work and even more parts from all types of jet engines. His use of jet engine parts stemmed from a limited time and budget available to dress the sets, but fortunately, junkyards were filled with the stuff and it was cheap. In addition to the engine parts, equipment used to heat food on airplanes also made it into the cockpit. Number 4. The JAWAS in the Mandalorian scrapped old Volkswagen fuel injection rails. The JAWAS in the Mandalorian literally pulled Din Djarin's starship down to almost nothing, rendering it incapable of flight, and scattered all over the place were various starship parts. Of course, in the real world, they weren't actual parts for any starship, they came straight out of a Volkswagen. Specifically, many of the parts the JAWAS was seen to be handling were fuel injection rails from a 2013 VW Jetta. As it happens, those fuel rails were the subject of a 2014 voluntary recall by Volkswagen. The recall required the switching out of the old parts for new ones, so it's likely the Mandalorian set dressers were able to get a bunch of them as scrap. That's rather fitting considering that's exactly what they were in the episode. Number 3. BOSSK'S outfit came straight from the set of Doctor Who. In The Empire Strikes Back, one of the more iconic bounty hunters to make an appearance is Bossk, and he's wearing a flight suit that is, in actuality, an RAF high-altitude, high-pressure Windax suit common throughout the 1960s. Granted, unless you flew for the Royal Air Force during that era, it wouldn't be familiar, or would it? Another thing that happened in the 1960s was a little old show called Doctor Who, and that's actually where the costume Bossk was wearing came from. More specifically, it was seen in the first Doctor's final story, The 10th Planet, which aired between the 8th and 29th of October, 1966. Bossk's costume, head, and arms are certainly new and unique to the character, but it was straight out of Doctor Who. It's not clear as to whether it's the exact same costume seen in 1966 or if it was just inspired by it, but there's no denying it's identical in appearance. Number 2. Qui-GON Jinn's communicator was a women's disposable razor. The Phantom Menace was George Lucas's return to glory, and it was also the first time Star Wars crept into the modern era. It had been nearly 20 years since the final film of the original trilogy released, which meant the prop designers and set dressers had much cooler toys at their disposal. You'd think that, right? Well, as it happens, as the world was getting used to flat-screen TVs and DVD players, folks like Qui-GON Jinn were busy using disposable razors to communicate. His oddly shaped yet somehow futuristic-looking comms device was actually the Sensor XL from Gillette for Women, with a new paint job. The razor was used as a base for a resin cast. This was then modified beyond a silver paint job and includes a few attachments to give it a unique sci-fi look. 3 soldered lugs were added to the hand grip while another was placed at the top. The device's 2 antennae are 2 matrix pins that were once the female side of cannon plugs used for digital flight controls in modern aircraft. There you have it, Qui-GON talks using a razor. And number 1. The Death Star's communications device was actually a floor heater. You won't find many sets more imposing throughout the Star Wars franchise than the Death Star's conference room. This is where the higher-ups got together to banter about one guy's sad devotion to an ancient religion that results in said guy being choked out. At the end of the day, it is not a pleasant room. At the center of this room sits a large table with all kinds of buttons and sci-fi doodads put about, but at the center of that is something rather ominous. The Death Star's conference table houses a large black communications device that makes an office speakerphone look like a child's toy. It's large, it's black, and it's creepy. It's also a floor heater. This is another example of the Star Wars set designers taking an old object and repurposing it into the franchise with little to no modifications made to it. Once again, the man, the myth, the legend, Roger Christian, was responsible. He found an old floor heater, cut all the wires off, painted it black, and placed it at the center of the table. He looked at it and thought, that's it. That's the thing we need. His design choices were meant to reflect those of Albert Speer, the Nazi architect who came up with various images and iconography for the fascist party, and well, you can definitely see the resemblance throughout the Empire. And those were just some of the brilliant origins behind some of Star Wars' most iconic props. Know of any other interesting behind-the-scenes stories related to the galaxy far, far away? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, it would be great if you could drop the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to Welcome to Star Wars so you don't miss another upload going forward. I've been Ewan, and until next time, may the Force be with you. Bye!